We are continuing in Yeridea Siman Pei Zayin, chapter 87, and we are continuing in Sif Vav, talking about different things that are not included in the prohibition of Basar Chalav. So we had mentioned in the Mechaber that Mei Chalav was not part of the problem. However, the Ramah disagrees, and that's going to be our discussion tonight, is Mei Chalav. And this is continuing in the discussion, moving right along over here. We're going to find out if this is a prohibition or not. So, the source for this is the Gemara in Chulin on Kuf Yudal Amud Aleph, Hamavashal of Mei Chalav Pater. That if you cook in Mei Chalav, we're not going to translate that yet. We'll get to that in a moment. And so Reish Lakish helps us out by saying there's a brisa that says that Mei Chalav Harei Ze Kechalav. This, right? Mei Chalav is just like milk. Okay? And there's other stuff that's even thinner than it that is considered like oil. And Reish Lakish says that this is only talking about to say that this is considered a liquid, so that if it's spilled on top of seeds and you touched it and you were tameh, that they would become tameh as well. However, for Basar b'chalav, Mei Chalav is not chalav. Okay? So what is Mei Chalav? Rashi calls it mizir. So what is that? So that's what he says. So his thing is what's called in Aramaic the whey. Okay, and this is what happens when you make cheese, and this is the residual liquid that flows out of the cheese after it hardens. Okay, that's what Rashi says. Tosfos is of a different opinion. Tosfos says that we've said that there is nonetheless a prohibition. We also know that there's another special dip called kutach. Kutach is a special dairy dip, and it's made from this stuff. And we seem to find that this is actually something that is prohibited, which is to eat meat with kutach. Okay, this dip. So according to Tosfos, this really is a type of milk, and therefore it's prohibited, but it appears to be a rabbinic prohibition. Okay? The Rosh is a different opinion. He says, and I say that the whey is actually prohibited by the Torah. And the stuff that the Talmud was referring to is not the whey. It happens after you take the liquid away from this stuff. Okay? So after you make the cheese, you cook the milk that comes out of it, and there's more stuff that floats to the top, like cottage cheese is what he's really referring to, or farmer cheese. This type of stuff that's made in a pot. And you can either add heat, as the Rosh is discussing, or you can add vinegar. Okay, and the cheese separates the hard part. There's another form of cheese that's a little softer that separates out. And when you separate that stuff out and leave more stuff behind, that stuff is called Mei Chalav. Okay, so Rashi and Tosfos are of the opinion that Mei Chalav is what we would call whey, and the Rosh says that it is when you take the whey and process it further. Okay, the Knesset Agadola makes a note over here that when you salt cheese, there's yet another liquid that comes out, and that is milk. That's considered milk, so there's no question about that. So we're only talking about this material that comes out of cheese making process. Okay, so let's talk about eating this stuff called Mei Chalav. So the Rosh writes the following. So the Rosh himself quotes the Rambam and says that you are not allowed to consume this type of product when it's made and mixed with and it comes from a non-Jewish source. Okay, so that's what his argument is. And now in this situation, we're saying that this substance over here, this whey product, is not the same as milk itself. Okay, and there doesn't seem to be any reason to permit it in one way, shape, or form. Okay, and he seems to say the prohibition is that it comes from the animal, but also that it comes from if an animal were to produce something like this, it would also not be permitted because it only could be milk that could be permitted. Okay, so he assumes that therefore that this stuff would not be permitted. The Rush then quotes the Rabbeinu Simcha that it's only Basar Chalav, that it's not considered like milk. So otherwise, we're saying this is a completely permitted substance, and it's not like milk, and it's not like cheese. And the Rush adds further that's also not like whey. So the Tur is of the opinion. He quotes the Rabbeinu Elazar, and he says that chalav that is permitted by the Torah law is what we're allowed to have. Okay, and he writes this in Siman Pei Aleph when he's talking about milk being permitted. But mei chalav technically would not be permitted, and the Beiner Simcha says it would be permitted. So that's what the meaning that we follow. So the Shach and the Rosh, they say the following. Okay, so we hold that mei chalav is pater according to the Mechaber. Therefore, it sounds like it would be something that is permitted to consume in general. And so, therefore, any other concern for its kashrus shouldn't be a problem as long as it comes from somebody who's a Jewish person who's making the substance, and it comes from a permitted animal. Okay, so that's what the Shach comes out with as well. Okay, so I'm not going to get too involved with that, but just know that that's an interesting approach. So we said there's a machlokas between the Mechaber and the Ramah about what goes on with these materials. So the Mechaber himself says that if you mix basar chalav while you're smoking meat with milk together, okay, and also if you mix them together and cook them in chamei tiveria in hot springs, so there's no issur d'oraisa. He says his words are in local. We said that may not involve an issur d'oraisa. Okay, and also mei chalav. So he's lenient in those cases. So that's what the Mechaber is taking that approach, and his explanation of mei chalav is that it is the whey that we were talking about. Okay, and so he seems to hold like Rashi and Tosos in that situation. Okay, and so that seems to be that. That seems to be that approach. So he takes that approach. Now the Mechaber earlier seems to say that mei chalav is something else. Okay, and that mei chalav is something else. So it seems to be that he's going to mazakesh tal beitrei. He's kind of going back and forth over there. However, the Ramah is clear that he takes the opinion of the Rush, and which is also the opinion of the Tur, to say that the whey would be prohibited. Okay, so that the Mechaber and the Ramah hold like this Tur, okay, and that it is whey is a permitted substance, that you can get it from the cheese, and they also seem to paskin like the Rush, even though it wasn't so clear from the Mechaber that he holds that way. The maskana is that in the Beis Yosef he's saying like that. Okay, and the Kaf HaChaim seems to say that even though it sounds like Rashi and Tosos, really he's trying to agree with the Tur. Okay, so what does this mean? So according to what the Mechaber writes, that Nisyova de Chalava is in the Beis Yosef, he says it's not considered the same thing as mei chalav. So that means that there's no reason to be lenient in any time at all, and that's the opinion of the Kaf HaChaim, which we just quoted, and the Pri Megadim. The Pri Chadash says that the prohibition is only rabbinic, and so he says that there might be reason to be lenient b'shas chak. Tamad Danei Shulchan, we mentioned previous times, says that in his opinion, the proper hachra, the proper way to understand this machlokes is to say that since some people say that taking whey and mixing it with meat is a rabbinic prohibition, so therefore in a case of a significant loss, and you have other reasons to be lenient that you can attach to it, meaning you can't rely on this heter in and of itself, so there might be reason to be lenient because the prohibition would only be rabbinic according to those opinions. But you would need a very, very good sveika, and it would have to be a very, very big need as well. So basically what we see from here is keep your whey as far away from your meat as possible. So It's further noted by Rabbi Kiva Iger that in a case of where you have meat, which is either from, so we've mentioned that meat from things like deer or from birds, that in these situations there might be reason to be lenient for cooking with hana, since this is only a rabbinic prohibition, and so that would include this one as well. And the Rabbi Eger continues to write that as long as it's a permitted animal, there seems to be reason. It seems reasonable to be lenient in this case, to consider it only rabbinic. However, he says that he disagrees with that approach in the end, and concludes that you would have to take the approach of Rashi, which is always prohibited to cook meat with milk, and just like it is also because you might come to eat it. And so therefore, if you're coming to cook something like whey with meat, you might come to eat it, and that would be a reason to prohibit it. Okay, and so that means that there's a difference of opinion of whether or not you are allowed to go ahead and cook this thing even when you're not going to eat it, because it seems like, according to the Mechaber, as I mentioned earlier, you might be able to be lenient for that, but the Ramah might have to be strict. Okay, so that's what he would say. In the Sefer Badi Shulchan, he points out that from many other poskim that it's permitted to take a Isser Rabbanon meat that is cooked with whey and to permit it for hana, which means you could go ahead and sell it, or you could feed it to your dog. And it's only the issue of cooking it for the purpose of eating that we were talking about. But if it's some type of benefit where it's just you didn't intend to do it, and you would lose out on the thing altogether, then we should be strict in such a case and not to be makel on that. Okay, so then one of the Achronim asks, so why is there an Isser D'Rabbanan on this altogether? So the Shach points out that when we say that there's no Malkus, we're saying that there's still Isser D'Rabbanan, and we talked about this last time. So it means that even though there's a patur, there's still a prohibition against going ahead and doing it. And that's what the Ramah is saying as well in this case, is that you are not allowed to go ahead and cook it. So that's really a question on the Ramah in and of itself, because the Ramah seems to be lenient in cases of Midah Rabbanan cases. So why over here does he say you can't cook mei chalav? And so the reason seems to be that he was talking about with types of meat that are prohibited from the Torah, like, let's say, cow meat, right? Regular cow meat. Okay? And so that's what he says. So the Badi Shulchan also adds over here that we can concede the point that you could permit it for benefit, even according to the Ramah, and even though they didn't want you to cook it, so if you went ahead and cooked it, you don't have to completely throw it out. So what do we see in terms of our laws over here that we come out from this section of the Shulchan Aruch? So from here we see that there's a machlokes rishonim as to whether or not we're talking about whey, or if you're talking about the stuff that's left over after you turn the whey into some other type of pot cheese. And so Rashi and Tosos are of the opinion that it is the material, the liquid material left over when you make cheese, and that's why it's only rabbinic. And the Rush is more precise to say that you have to remove some more of the protein from the whey itself, and that leftover product is mei chalav, and that's a rabbinic prohibition. But whey itself is still considered the same as milk. And Kedessa Gedola even points out that if you were to salt cheese and extract liquid from the cheese directly, they should consider that to be milk and prohibit that from the Torah. Okay. So we also talked about how eating mei chalav, if that's permitted. So we saw that the Rush and the Rambam, and the Rush is quoting other Rishonim from Ashkenaz, that seem to imply that whey should be acceptable when extracted from cheese, even if the cheese does not made by a Jew, and even if it comes from an animal that should not have permitted the cheese either, or whether it's just not allowed to be eaten in general. And so we hold of the opinion that it is permitted to go ahead and eat the whey, okay, and that's the opinion of the Rabbeinu Simcha. And the Mechaber and the Ramah seem to all agree that not only can you eat the whey and eat the cheese made from the whey, we still are strict to treat it like Basar b'chalav when you cook it with meat. However, if you take the secondary material made from it, then that would only be the Esed Rabbanon. And it seems to be a difference of opinion between the Ramah and the Mechaber as to whether or not you would be allowed to do that. And we seem to take the approach that one should not cook that at all, even though it seems to be not clear that the Ramah should be strict in this case. We'll actually talk a little bit more about that in a moment, in another future discussion of these laws. And then the Madlein Shulchan points out that there's lots of reasons to be matir in a situation, even if you happen to use whey and you have other reasons to be matir, you can be mitzaref a number of different reasons to be lenient.